Hi there, this is Joe Meadows and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On today's episode, we have Jeff Maccarella. I've really enjoyed, getting to know Jeff over the last couple of years. Really kind of smart, thoughtful guy who I think approaches safety in a way that translates really well beyond just the safety space. And I think that's a testament to the fact that since I've known Jeff, he's gone from leading safety operations at American Water in their military services division to now being a regional operations director. So you might be wondering why we've got him on the show, because he's not a safety guy anymore. But I think there's a lot to be learned from folks who've been able to translate the skills that have allowed them to be successful in a safety environment and now to be moving on to more holistic responsibilities. I think that there's an interesting conversation to be had there. So I think Jeff's, real smart guy, has a lot of really great perspectives, and I know I really enjoyed the conversation. So I hope you do as well. And without further ado, let's let Jeff take it away. Can you give us a little bit of an intro on kind of yourself and where you work?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Jeff Maccarella, I'm a regional director of operations for American Water. We're a publicly traded utility company, the largest one in the US. We employ about 6,400 people. We operate in about 24 states throughout the US. And we have two main segments of the business that we operate in, one being the regulated business and the other one being the market-based business. I happen to work on the market-based business side of American Water. And I've been in the industry for, all said, probably about 15 years at this point when I add it up. Been with American Water pushing 9 years. Started out in the laboratory of a wastewater lab. Kind of like figured that all out. Looked outside the window and said, what's that big thing out there as far as a wastewater treatment plant? And then just kind of dove into the wastewater industry, and by osmosis, you start learning about the water stuff as well. And then you sort of just progress from that point. So fast forward to 2022 and here I am.
Okay. So I guess I feel like everybody the water is probably one of those things that everybody has just enough exposure to think they know what you're talking about, but they probably don't. So can you help me understand a little bit more of when you say you're kind of operating for the market side of a water utility, can you help me understand, what are the employees of the business doing on a day-to-day? What are you kind of managing and overseeing, and how does that work on a business level?
Right, sure. So fundamentally, the two business segments, the market-based business and/or the regulated business, the folks do the same exact things. Folks are out there turning the valves the same way, treating the water the same way, adding the chemical, looking for emerging contaminants, working with their customers. We just make our money slightly differently on both business units, right? So on the market-based business, the market is competitive. And so we bid on contracts and hopefully we win those contracts. We have a particular business unit, the military services group, that bids on 50-year, so 50 contracts throughout the DoD essentially. So they bid on the contract, hopefully, and they're successful in that bid, and then we run the water and wastewater system for 50 years. But like I said, the stuff that the folks do out in the field, it's the same, right? It's turning the valves, treating the water. So,
and is the business end to end? So when you win one of those 50-year contracts, are you going in and taking over existing infrastructure, or is that you're also going in and installing infrastructure into your systems?
So both. There are some nuances between both business units or both business segments that we have. But yes, typically when we go in, we're purchasing the system, and then we invest back into the system. So some of the assets we get are really good. Some of the assets we get aren't so good. And then we have to figure out where's the best way to spend our money, right? So is it more prudent to spend it here or spend it over there? So that's a bunch of strategic thought that goes into all of that aspects of how we reinvest back into the system and make the water even more clean than it already is, and still meet all of the local and federal drinking water requirements that we have to, and the wastewater requirements.
Okay, well, I guess we don't have to get too into the water side of things. Just for context, I was curious. So how does people might be wondering, you mentioned earlier, you're in a sort of operational
director role. That's might seem strange in the context of this podcast, but we got connected because previously you were in a health and safety leadership role, and now you've transitioned to the operational side. And I'm really excited to dig into that, and kind of I think that gives you an interesting view on a couple sides of the coin here. But can you just help me understand, what? Well, can we dig a little deeper into what took you from the lab to the safety space to now operations? What does that trajectory look like? And did you fall into this, or was this a master plan that you've been executing on since you were, knee high to a grasshopper? What's going on?
Yeah. Nah, it's one of those things where, I finished school, studied chemistry, and, you have to get a job, right? So you default to what you sort of were trained in. I didn't have any onset of saying, I'm going to get into the EH&S space. So you just kind of migrate to it one way or the other. Opportunities arise, and then you just take the opportunities as they come across. But when you're sat in the laboratory and you look outside the window and I go, man, it's like a 5 MGD wastewater treatment plant. It's pretty interesting. You start asking some of the operators around, like, how's this work? What's this all about? I do the stuff in the lab, but how do we get to these numbers? How does this connect to that? When you're in the lab, you really want to understand why you're doing certain things, or at least I did. But there's only one way to really connect those dots, and that's to ask the operators. So hey, how do we get this number? I know it comes from this location in the plant, but how do you take that sample? Where does it come from? Where does that stuff go? So then your mind just naturally kind of starts asking all of these other questions. And then it just sort of migrated into the operational side early on in my career, and being on call and understanding what that stress is like, sort of in the background of, you have folks that are drinking the water at the end of the tap and having dinners. And they're also looking to flush their toilet and have the stuff go away the right way, right? And so you got to treat that. So you're treating things on the front end with the consumer, but you're also treating it to put that safe water back out into the environment so we can be the trusted stewards of that resource. So that's kind of where I was. That fire was lit early on in my career in the operations space. The sheer brevity of what we do and how much folks trust us to do what we do and to get it right, pretty much, not pretty much, but to get it right all of the time. That was kind of where that fuel and that fire stays.
So was it curiosity that pulled you out of the lab, or was it not wanting to be in the lab that fueled your curiosity?
I think a combination. Definitely a combination. I think it was like you can understand, or at least maybe folks can understand, if you do work in a laboratory, you can get into a certain rhythm and a certain flow of things, and that just didn't fit my particular, person who I am. But I also really wanted to really understand like what the numbers meant, right? You could run a mixed liquor, you could run a phosphate test, but what does that mean? What does getting a 2 versus a 15 mean? How does it relate to the permit? And so that curiosity kind of led me out into the field to really take a look at what that treatment process was like, at least on the wastewater side, and then migrated. Okay, there's water stuff out here too. And then I came over to American Water in 2013. Did a little bit more of the technical stuff. I say technical stuff, sort of in and around the water, wastewater, helping the new contracts that we did get. And then sort of the health and safety, to kind of put a bow on the question, health and safety came to be where I did environmental compliance before being asked to do the health and safety. And sort of through that journey, there's goals to meet, there's metrics to sort of help you get to these goals. But during that time period, the business unit I was working for, we were growing quite a bit with all these military contracts. And I met so many awesome people that sort of took me out of my bubble. So, I'm born and raised in New Jersey, but then you meet people from Texas, you meet people from Alabama, Utah, California. And we treat water the same way. And we all kind of have this same common mentality about ourselves in the water wastewater business. It was really, really cool to see the passion that other people had in this business. And I'm sure it's like that in other businesses. But then the light bulb kind of did go off to say, this health and safety, we do want our folks to come to work being whoever they are, bring them full selves to work. And that's pretty darn cool when you bring some creative thought and people can be themselves, but you also want them to go home safely as well. And I sort of took that a step further to say, yeah, we want you to come to work and we want you to be yourself. We want you to work safely. We want you to go home safe to your families. But I also want you to take safety home with you. So we do work a lot of hours together, and I get that. I think folks can appreciate that. But there is an element where you can't just flip the switch on and off when it comes to safety. So I really, really took that to heart, and I hope folks are taking the little tidbits that we share about it, safety on whatever it might be, a roundtable discussion, toolbox talk. Like, don't use your kitchen chair to get that box of cereal that's way up high. Put a step stool in your kitchen somewhere, right? Something little as that, because if you do that the wrong way, and then you come to work and you're expected to work safely, well, if you're not doing it at home, how can we expect you to do it safe in the workplace as well? So I think the two are uniquely tied to each other. And early on, that's kind of how that was one of the major passion points I think I had with safety, was trying to, go home safe, but also take the safety stuff home with you. Drive safely when you get home. Do a little bit of defensive driving when you get home, because that is important. So you can come back the next morning and still provide, so.
So, okay. Well, I want to circle back to this, but I want to kind of button up the where we were earlier in saying, or I think that, again, we've had some conversations offline. I think I have a little bit of an insight here, but I also think that for a lot of people, it might be difficult for them to imagine the scale of kind of what you guys are doing and what's really involved here. Because I think as soon as people hear a little bit more about that, it'll help them conceptualize the challenges here from a health and safety perspective. So when you talk about, coaching these people to be, safe at work, safe at home, what can you help me understand? Like, what are the hazards that you're concerned about? Because, obviously you're dealing with water. There's probably a certain biological element there. There's all these other things, but you also have a pretty sizable kind of industrial workforce that you're looking out for as well, in just kind of a general maintenance. And like you said, kind of spinning wrenches and twisting valves. So can you just help paint the picture of what's the scale of the business, maybe broadly, as well as the regional group that you're running now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, tactically speaking, confined space entry, lockout, tagout, trenching and shoring. Those are probably the first three that come to mind. And then how connected we are from an electrical standpoint. So arc flash is probably the fourth one. No particular order. I think they're all equally important. So maybe they're all, number one. But these are all the things that we deal with, and our folks are putting themselves into risky situations. Also we do have tasks that are repetitive, like turning a valve, a 6-inch valve takes a lot of turns to open and close. And sometimes they get stuck because they haven't been operated in a year or 6 months, whatever that might be. So turning that valve is not easy. I don't care if it's a 6-inch valve or it could be a 12-inch or 12 inches. There's an element to what our folks do that is a little bit of everything. And you throw in the complexity sometimes of folks being asked to do things maybe after hours when they get called in, and they're getting called in. They've done the task before when their colleague's been with them and they had that safety net to sort of say, yeah, you're going to do this way, and this is how we get it done. But there's an element where that keeps me awake a little bit, is our folks are asked to operate when they're on call. And you just hope that what you did during that time when you had them, that they're taking that when it's 10 o'clock at night, they're thinking about that thing that they're doing and they're going to do it safely. So, I mean, the scale of what we do touches, like I said, the numerous areas of the business and other safety hazards that folks see. I mean, working from heights, obviously water towers are way high up there, right? So you got to be safe in that regard. So there's a lot of things we touch in the water wastewater business that we have to get it right.
For sure. Okay. So I think maybe fleshing that out a little bit more, lockout, tagout, trench, and confined space, like these are heavy hitters. I think anybody listening to this is going to understand that, as far as, that's all pretty high potential, challenges to be facing. And what I'm interested to dig into a little bit more as we sit here and chat and, try to bring something, novel based on your experience and the successes that you've had and the things that you've learned is that, as we alluded to earlier, you've recently made a transition from being that sort of, or having that isolated focus specifically around the health and safety of the team and understanding those challenges. And since then, you've been, given the opportunity to now take more of a holistic understanding of the business and really drive things on that operational level. And I guess I'm curious to know, and I might be asking you to sell yourself here a little bit. I don't know. Hopefully it's not uncomfortable. We'll see what happens. But can you help me understand? I think for a lot of people in the safety space, the niche nature of those challenges can sometimes make people feel boxed in, that, it's difficult to relate the things that a safety leader might deal with to let's say the broader operational elements of the business. So can you help articulate, what do you think it was about you that helped the business see that you might have, that you've had a certain degree of success in the health and safety space, and that they'd be well served to see you, take on a more holistic responsibility? Do you think there was anything in particular about the way you were approaching those problems that gave them the confidence to maybe expand the things you worry about? Because the reality is that operational role, you still have to care about health and safety. You just have to care about a bunch of other things as well. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two things. I think now being in the operational side of the business, I thought I had an appreciation for what my other colleagues in operations did and had to deal with. But there was a heck of a knowledge gap between what I thought I appreciated and what I actually appreciate now. You're right that we do, operational folks get asked to do a lot of different things, and it's environmental compliance, it's health and safety, it's budgets, it's people, it's meeting deadlines, it's fostering culture, dealing with your own internal pressures that you might put on yourself to succeed and want to do well, and all these things that you kind of put on yourself internally, but the company kind of puts on you as well. I think for me, what helped the most was a recent transition from the federal government that we had when we got a system up at West Point, New York. I helped stand up that particular system, when we call that a transition. And that to me was one, it was right when COVID kind of all came to be. So that was another wrinkle, and transitions are hard enough. But we had a really good team that helped with that transition from the government to us. And that sort of branched out my firsthand appreciation for operations, the complexities, the strategy that comes into it, sort of go slow is fast at times, especially when it comes to people. The government is going to transition one way or the other, so you got to be prepared for that. So got a firsthand experience of the stresses and the pressures of what operations felt like. And I think I did a pretty good job, because the transition and the team we had, we did come together, especially during a really hard time with COVID, to execute on that. But that to me sort of relit the fire. I use that expression. It relit the fire that says, I really want to get back into operations, because that's where the core of, I think, our business is, right? That's where you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You get the safety, you get the environmental, you get the strategy, you get being a leader, you have to hold yourself accountable, right? There's all these other things that I wasn't necessarily getting from health and safety, where it was more, hey, this is what we have to do. And you're more asking buy-in, as opposed to, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get buy-in, and this is how and why we're going to execute on this the safe way, the right way. And oh yeah, we have this other stuff we got to figure out too, operationally, and schedules and people and budget and managing the culture. So balancing the two, I think, is where I find the most fun in operations, and doing that West Point transition sort of showed me all of that, but it also relit the fire that said I want to go back into doing that.
Okay, well, I've got a few questions here, but I'm curious, just based on that comment, do you think I'm not necessarily searching for hot takes here, but do you think that we do ourselves a disservice by creating that separation in the first place? Like, do you think that we can effectively manage health and safety without thinking about things more holistically, or that's just the way we got to do it?
No, I do think you need the support functions from health and
Yeah.
safety. 100%. I don't think you can ever do it in a vacuum. I think what I've come to appreciate and come to learn is that I think when you're in operations, and you do have that support from health and safety in place, really try to seek to understand each other's viewpoint, and with that, seek to find solutions together, right? So it might be really, it might be really hard to implement a certain lockout tagout at a one location because they only do it in one particular spot. So the policy may say, go do X, Y, Z, and you have to implement it and go all do these things, but it might not fit that particular location's specific setup. Yep. So operations has to be able to communicate that back to the health and safety functional group in a professional, articulated way that says, we need to modify this a little bit, or, hey, we're not going to really meet every single little detail within this policy, but we sure as heck are going to meet the intent of it, and our folks are going to be safe, right? Are you okay with that? Or where are we at with the risk spectrum to manage through this? Because we don't want to have our folks get hurt, right? But we also know there's an acknowledgement of reality that there's stuff in the field that you just cannot capture it all, and you can't capture it all in a policy. But also when you're going through that process, health and safety has to have the understanding and appreciation that, right, we have to be flexible. We have to be able to modify. We have to be able to work through this to find a solution, while both parties have to have their boundaries set, right?
So is that, just to dig into that, do you think that's as simple as, in environments where I've worked before, the way they might try and solve that problem, make sure people are on the same page, is that, operations comes up against this roadblock. Maybe there's the physical makeup of a space. We can't follow the health and safety procedure as written, but we want to make this deviation. And that's just a management of change thing. You fill out the form, you send it to health and safety, you get it signed off. Do you think it's as simple as approaching these things in that procedural kind of way? Or do you think that I'm curious to dig into, for you, now that you're on the other side of the table, what can we talk, or what do you wish that the people in the health and safety side could be doing to make this easier? And then additionally, what would be your insights to those on the operations side? Specifically, right, how would you recommend that they stay on the same page with their health and safety counterparts?
Yeah. So again, seek to understand each other's viewpoint. They have to do it. You have to do it. I think that's huge. And if it means dragging out the conversation or dragging out the topic, then so be it. Keep doing it. I think I've come to learn in pretty short order is explain the full. I'm going to say explain the full why, right? So that meaning, don't just explain why I have to do this or why I have to follow the policy. Like, I know if I don't do it, I could get hurt or I could be held accountable to that. Like, I think the folks generally get that, but you really have to connect the why do I have to do this, health and safety people, because I got all this other stuff I got to do too. And I need to understand what needs to get prioritized in all of this. Is this like stop everything you're doing because I'm 100% delinquent in this space and somebody's going to get really catastrophically hurt? Or is what we're doing pretty darn good, but it's sort of a rectangle and you need to have it fit into a square hole, a square shape here, but it still has four sides to it, right? So I think you have to explain the tactical side of the why alongside with more of the vision of why we're going through this process as well. I think sometimes that vision aspect of the safety edict, call it coming down, isn't always articulated. And I think that the two have to go hand in hand.
Well, I'm sure that there's folks out there who would say that they try to do that, and then, regardless of what side they're on, the guy on the other side's an asshole and he just doesn't want to listen. And he's, it's just people saying, I'm doing my best here and people aren't engaging. And do you think that that's ultimately just falls back to that failure to understand or that failure to communicate in one way or another, that we're all ultimately fighting for the same team and it's just a matter of maybe filling in those gaps?
Yeah, I think it's individual leadership at that point, right? So, hey, common ground, common goal here. We got to sort through this one. So let's not just throw our hands up here, right? On operations or health and safety side, and I think whether you're on the health and safety, right, or you're on the ops side, I think you as an individual have to have an understanding of what you're willing to tolerate in that particular situation, right? If it's a no-go and this is what we have to do and to keep our folks safe, then okay, let's continue to talk this through until we find a solution. I think sometimes we run into a roadblock and we think we beat it as hard as we can, and we beat it to death, and it's like, oh, he's just being stubborn and they don't know what they're talking about. So yeah, that very well maybe be the case. But step back, see the forest through the trees. What are we willing to tolerate if we don't come to a reasonable solution here? Are we willing to tolerate somebody getting hurt? No, you don't want to tolerate it. Health and safety. I don't want to tolerate it. Operations. So, okay, we just found ourselves some common ground right here, didn't we? So continue to persevere and push through that. And I think if you do that the right way, then you will have a lot of sort of barriers being broke down after that point, because it only takes that one little push of the domino for it to go. So I think whether it's somebody in operations sort of seeking to understand that or health and safety, but I really think it comes down to what are you willing to tolerate in that particular situation. That throw my hands up. Oh, okay. Well, we're at an impasse here. Well, no. Are you willing to tolerate somebody getting hurt? And I don't think either side really wants that to be the case. So maybe that's a prompting question that you could ask in that conversation of what are we willing to tolerate here if we're not going to be able to work through this?
Yeah. And what advice would you give to the health and safety person who says, I try to communicate this to our team. I try to say, we're looking, we've got some exposure here and we want to make sure everyone's going to get home safe. But when I bring up these issues with my operations team, what they say is, you're catastrophizing. There's no chance that's going to happen. This is all in your head. Do you have any advice to them and like how to, or is that simply a matter of maybe you've got some uncooperative teammates who don't have their priorities straight, or are there any tactics you could share from an operational side on, how do we break through that and help people understand that balance between slowing down a little bit to get the great results, but also to make sure that folks are going, are safe?
Yeah, I think that's very hard, right? When you're at that point where like, I've done this. And there comes a certain time when you do have to think about your own tactics, whether it's operations is dug in or health and safety is like, they just don't get it. I don't understand. There are other key stakeholders in that conversation that can help influence the outcome that's desired on both sides, right? Nobody wants anybody to get hurt. Nobody wants that. So there's usually one or two influencers or a stakeholder within that group that their voice hasn't just been heard yet, but when they speak, everybody's going to get on board with it. And I think when you come to that impasse in that situation, you just haven't gotten to you haven't been able to reach the right person. And that's a challenge for you, operations, or you within health and safety to say, I'm failing, but if I keep doing the same darn thing I'm doing, I'm still going to fail. So, okay, stop doing that, right? So you have to find that key critical stakeholder or stakeholders. And it might be the person who's always quiet, who's done it for the last 20 years, but got away with it for the last 20 years, but never had the ability or the platform to say anything about it, right? Or it could be a senior regional director of somewhere or another coming in and saying, yeah, okay, you know what, operations, you're wrong. You got to do this, right? And so look at role power is being asserted there at that point. You don't always want to use that, but there is an element of we got to do this and we got to do it the safe way. So I think you have to be open-minded in many regards, but you just cannot, like, again, what are you going to tolerate as operations or health and safety? Are you going to tolerate an impasse in this situation? And if you are, then that's not a good starting point. Start over, right? So
I think that's super wise, because I think that just gets down to fundamental, like how to be an effective business executive, full stop, regardless of whatever department is on your pay stub. That getting to those places, and I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to focus on through this show, is to help people understand, how do we elevate the conversation here, and that so that we can focus on how do you get things done no matter what. Because I think, again, health and safety has kind of been maligned or either supported unthinkingly, which probably gives people the false sense of confidence because they're not used to negotiating challenges, or kind of tucked in the corner, and it can often insulate people a little bit from those tactics of just, hey, we need to bring a few more voices in here. We need to get things done, because throwing our hands up is never gonna get us there. Okay.
And it's role model behavior, right? Whether you're wherever you sit in your organization, right? You should always be role modeling the behavior that you want, right? Yeah. So it's every portion, in my experience, and American Water is great in this regard, right? The folks that are really, really, really good leaders role model the behaviors that they expect, right? So if you just take a step back, it's not just the health and safety aspect, but if they're going to tolerate being blowing the budget and just be like, oh, we'll just make it up next quarter or whatever, it's like, okay, why don't we put a little short-term interval control in place to make sure this doesn't happen again? So that is another like analogy that you can use on the finance side, or financials with budgets and stuff, that you're not going to tolerate it over there. So why would you tolerate an impasse with health and safety? You just have to continue working at it. And whether you want to call it a win-win solution, whether you want to call it acknowledge reality and just own it and figure it out, you do that in other pockets of the business. So role model the behavior you want to see on health and safety. And I think you said it, like, our health and safety and operations folks just not good at negotiating with one another or finding that solution, right?
Yeah, you're giving me a bunch of ideas that maybe I need to have like a negotiation expert on the show, just to kind of do a master class in that stuff. Because I think you're right, that so much of what everybody does, regardless of their function, it just comes down to that part. How do you make, or just having influence? That's such a huge part of leadership, and having that ability to help people see your perspective and want to follow that to a certain degree. Negotiation is a big tool in that toolkit. Right. Okay, cool. So we've talked about this impasse between health and safety operations. I think I don't want to beat this thing to death, but so I want to take a bit of a step back here. Let's ease off on the operational stuff a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about your career when you were responsible for health and safety. And I don't think I'm speaking at a school here, that you were specifically focused on that military service division. Mm-hmm. So that was you, right? You're making sure that everybody gets home safe, installing and maintaining water infrastructure in military facilities. Or okay. All right, good. Okay, so we're doing that. Can you help me understand a little bit on kind of how did you think about health and safety success when those were your responsibilities, and how did you kind of keep a handle on that so that you were able to track and move towards success in that role?
Yeah, so probably one of the biggest things was it takes a little bit of time, or it did for myself, to find your voice in safety. So, how you say things, who you say it to, the way in which you speak with urgency or you speak with diligence, right? I think you have to kind of figure out what your voice is on the safety side of the business. I do know, and I recognized early on, that you have to be very mindful of what I just characterize as the do's and don'ts of metrics. I think organizations can get a little bit hung up on, where am I at against the goal of TRIR or DART, or where am I at with my near miss submissions? I think those are important. I get it. I think most folks understand that and get that. But people drive the outcomes that the organization gets. And I have had a lot of great mentors and leaders within American Water that have sort of helped me along the way and understand where my voice was within that health and safety space. So I think early on, I like to focus on the people side of it and use the metrics sort of. They're gonna be what they are, but are we focused on the right things from a day-to-day standpoint? What's going to resonate with the folks day to day, and just try to relate to them as best you can and be like, look, I know, I get it. This thing's been rolled out. It's going to be a little bit of a hassle, but we're going to work through it together. You have any questions, let me know. And they hang up the phone. Okay. Pick up the phone and call those 5 or 6 different leaders at that local level who were on that. And you say, hey, do you understand what I was going with there? Or do you have any questions? I think that little extra touch helps, sort of not only continue to message that, hey, we got it subtly, right? It's like, we still got to get this thing done, but I'm also reaching out to you on a smaller scale because you might not feel comfortable on a bigger team meeting like that, expressing your heartburn over it. So I think if you build your relationships and build strong relationships, trusting relationships, that for me, I think I found where my success was. I can't point in time when I don't think anybody can really point in time when you really feel as if you have that trust with someone. It just sort of happens. It's like, why do I trust my wife? Well, I don't know when I can't tell you it was March 5th, 2014. I have no idea, but I know I inherently trust her. And it's because you have those repeated events where you say what you're going to do and you just repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it. And I think that is what's super helpful from a safety standpoint, is to just engage in that trust and say, yes, we're going to roll this thing out, but I'm also going to help you, and I'm going to track the deadline for you. And I'm also going to remove a roadblock when you say you need one moved. So that to me was successful when I first took on the safety side of the business. And, I knew a little bit about it, right? But I really didn't when you start getting some of the questions and you're like, I don't know, but I'll go find out for you. And I think a lot of times I think I put pressure on myself that you had to know everything from a technical standpoint. But also I think it resonates a little bit more where you were like, I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I'm going to follow up with you. And what's fair, a week? Okay. And then you follow up in a week. So you're being vulnerable, right, as a leader, but then you're also circling back and building all that trust where I'm like, I'm human too. I have no idea. I've never come across this before, but let me go read the regulation and let me go see what OSHA has to say about it. And then you go dive into it. So that's kind of how I managed it for the first, parts of that health and safety journey in my career.
And what would you say to people who'd say, Jeff, that sounds amazing, to have all this time to do all these follow-ups or to invest all this, all this energy into those relationships. But because, I also feel all this pressure around also technical knowledge, I'm never going to have the time for that, or I don't think that it's worth it today. What would you say to those people?
Check your priorities.
Yeah.
So if you in a leadership role or any role, quite frankly, if you're not going to invest in your colleague at the local level or sitting right next to you, if you're not going to value a 20-minute conversation, then you're just crushing your culture, or you're not building it, or you're taking away from it. So it's where you want to spend your time, but also where am I going to spend my time that's going to be most effective 2 years from now? Is that 20-minute phone call in 2022? Yeah, it might make me pull my hair out now and I might get a gray hair and I might have a lot of stuff to do right now, but is that 20-minute phone call going to buy me a heck of a lot of time in 2025 when I need it? Right. So I would say, who else and where else would you want to spend your time? And maybe you have your priorities a little bit backwards in that regard. So.
Well, I guess I can speak with a certain degree of personal humility in that I know in my business, kind of in my day job, one of the things that I've kind of prioritized in 2022. Well, that's weird to say out loud. As we've grown, I got to a place where I didn't have kind of that personal relationship and with everybody working remote with the broader team. And I listened to a podcast or something, and on that podcast, the guy was talking about the fact that he does rolling one-on-ones kind of with the whole organization. So as a leader, he's checking in with somebody, regardless of what they do every day. And anyway, I thought that was kind of inspiring, and I started doing it, and it scares me on my calendar sometimes, but at the same time, I think the first day I did it was worth it, because all of a sudden I was getting all these insights into things that were invisible to me otherwise, and I would have never, you just don't get that insight on a team meeting or in an email. You're never going to build that relationship in that way. So right. I think certainly some wisdom there. Okay.
Yeah. And you find a bunch of common ground in that, right? I mean,
yeah.
Like, how do you get to really understand what somebody's hobbies or interests or likes are? You got to talk to them. Because if you just get on a meeting and you talk about a tactical thing about how do I treat this water, or how do I put this pipe in the right way, or how do I get this chemical pump to work, whatever that might be. Okay, click, hang up the phone. Joe, I don't know anything about you. I don't know anything about your kids. If you have kids or not, I don't know what you like. I don't know if you like to golf. I don't like to hunt. None of that stuff was discussed. But it's so important, because at least my appreciation of safety now is you really got to understand the whole person when they come into work. Because we do work a lot together. But hey, it'd be really cool. Dude, I saw like an 8-pointer driving into work today. But yeah, it's pretty cool. All that deer is always there all the time. Now you're connecting on a completely different level that has nothing to do with work, as opposed to like, I can only talk to Jeff or Joe about work, and that's the only thing I can talk about. Oh my God, that sounds terrible, So that 20-minute conversation that you're going to have with that person, whether it's offline or just about random things, you now know what they're like when they come into work. Are they quiet for a reason? Or maybe I can start off the conversation about something that they really like, and it puts them at ease, and it puts their mind at ease, and then they can go to work and work, safely. Right.
For sure. Okay. So to me, this gives me an insight into the way you're approaching one of my least favorite terms, which is safety culture. And I think you're just talking about culture full stop.
Yeah.
Right. If we start to put labels on it and put things into this kind of box, you're putting those limits that I think, again, anyway, makes a ton of sense to me. Now, when we spoke before, I remember you, and I just want to bring up this kind of story you told me about. So you were, I'll tee it up here a little bit, but I think you were driving to a site somewhere, and you saw a kind of sign that made you think a little bit about the way kind of you're conceptualizing safety. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I that really got the gears turning for me. And I think it's kind of speaks to this same kind of culture and approach that we have with our colleagues as we're trying to keep each other safe.
Yeah. It was recent too. Relatively recent, I should say. So I was just driving by, and I was either stuck at a red light and something caught my eye, and I was like, what's that? And the safety sign, I wrote it down. I'm staring over here at my wall over here because I wrote it down. It was that impactful, right? It said, most safety, you see some safety slogans out there, and you go, okay, that's cool. I get it. I can get on board with that. Okay. But this one barely said anything related to safety. It had safety like in font 8 at the very bottom of the sign. And it was right pulling into some I think it was like a recycling plant or something. And it said, be present now, be present later. And it was so simply put and then at the very, like I said, at the very bottom, it said safety. And that was it. It was boom, boom, boom. I'm like, okay. So then the light turns green, and I kept going, but I started to reflect on that. And that, to me, encompasses what safety really is. It's being present now in whatever task that you're doing, but also be present in the moment, be present in what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. Am I doing it safely? Am I looking out for my colleagues? Am I doing things the right way? And then the second part of that was be present later, right? So I can go home and be present with my loved ones, my family, my dogs. When I go hunting, whatever I got to do, I can be present in that space as well. And maybe it was just the simplicity of the messaging. I think sometimes the simplicity of the messaging just resonates with folks at various times. But to me, that was just so impactful. That was one of those aha moments. Like I'll carry that with me as I move forward, whether in operations or just in my career in general. Just be present now, be present later. Safety. All right, there you go. Yeah. Pretty simple. Yeah.
It transcends safety slogans. Like I think that's just wisdom. That's just a good idea.
Exactly. And that is like, that's culture of safety, culture of your overall company, right? Okay. If you don't get that right and foster it every single day, yeah, good luck getting the other stuff done, right? And metrics and goals and do's and don'ts of this, that, and the other, and policies and practices, because most organizations have policies and practices and SOPs and O&M manuals. They all have these things in place, and 90% of the companies probably look all the same. But what makes a successful company better than somebody who isn't overly successful when it comes to how we measure ourselves on safety performance with the metrics? It's the culture, right? It's 100% the culture. And if you don't foster that every day, relate to people on a personal level, yeah, you'll never cross that threshold of having a good culture in general.
Okay. So anyway, I agree with all of that. I think that all makes this whole narrative of saying we need to build relationships in order to have that care and have that connection. And I think that's especially true in this world where, again, we're all increasingly disconnected from each other on all those kind of little physical things, the water cooler discussion. Right. I don't know if you're using Teams or you're using Slack, but the water cooler channel isn't the same as the actual water cooler. And so I think, that all makes a ton of sense. And I think that's super smart. So I think we've got this piece. You talked earlier about role model behaviors. I think, again, that's another key part of it. But I think if I'm a listener, I might be thinking, listen, boys, this is all great, but this is all very kind of tough to measure. How do I present? I made a lot of calls to the board at the end of the month. So can we talk a little bit about metrics? You talked a little bit about the do's and don'ts of metrics in the past. And can you just dig into that a little bit? How do you take all of these soft skills and translate those into results? Because, so you don't end up in a situation where everybody says, Jeff's a real nice guy, but I don't know what he does all day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. He just talks really good about nothing. Right. Yeah. So I think do's and don'ts of metrics. I think you really have to be prudent when you look to gamify metrics, right? So this business unit is doing X% and this business unit is doing Y%, and there's a big gap between the two. Not all people respond to gamifying metrics in the way that you think that you want them to respond to, right? Yeah. So I think in certain times, I think it's a good aspect to use, but not all the time. Don't throw it in everybody's faces that I'm the business unit that's poor performing in this particular safety space. That gets old after a while, because not everybody can appreciate why those metrics are where they are. And there's always a story behind all of the data. Don't be fooled by the numbers in many regards, because that might be a really, really good cultural spot to be in the organization, but maybe they just had a bad stretch of 2 months and their numbers were driven all over the place, right? That can be more detrimental to that particular business unit who absolutely crushed it for you for the last 10, 15 years. And now you're saying that they're bad, right? Just because you have one or two particular incidents doesn't mean you're just a terrible operating unit or a business entity. Your culture is still really strong. And that's probably when you want to foster that even more, to say, look, we're here for you. So I would say be very diligent in when and how you want to gamify the metrics. There's a time and a place, but it's not every month on a slide that says you're doing good or you're doing bad. I would think a challenge that I'm trying to work through myself is maybe you go an entire quarter without showing metrics on the very first 10 slides of whatever it is you're talking about in a monthly safety review. Talk about people, talk about really good quality near miss or unsafe conditions that folks submitted, or this is what we've actually closed out in the last 30 days, and thank the individuals for submitting what they submitted and doing what they did. Right. So that's a challenge that I've been kicking around a little bit myself, and for a couple other folks in the organization, to kind of say, let's just not use metrics. Right. We have all these things in place that we want our folks to do. So let them go do it. Right. As opposed to saying, we're really close to that goal, and if we continue to do all these things this way, we're really close. But then something happens and it's like, oh man, I hope I don't hide people reporting things, or I hope I don't disappoint the organization by being the person that puts us over the edge of the company-wide goal or my business unit goal. Right. So I think if you talk less about metrics and more about sort of our desired outcomes of folks going home and taking safety home with them, that creates a little bit more momentum in my eyes than saying we're above the goal or we're below the goal, and the goal is 1.7, y'all failed, this is a problem. Oh my gosh, now I'm resigned. Now I'm just a number in the organization. That doesn't feel good, right?
Do you think that when this is something people might be sick of hearing me talk about it, but do you think that that's partially about the metrics we choose to use? Like, I think you're totally right that when we focus too much on the outcomes of our systems, that you're creating weird incentives for people to either not report things or report things that aren't legit, or depending on the metric itself. And one of the things that I've often asked myself is, why aren't we just making the metrics higher fidelity so that we're measuring the journey towards the outcome, and we know if we're on the right track, so that if we fall off course, we know, everything's good. But I feel like there's such little maturity in the information that we pull in that we just, or I would be concerned about saying, let's not track metrics, because knowing how many really high quality near misses we got is a metric in and of itself. It's just not the ones that people like to talk about. And
Right.
Any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, that's a paradigm shift there, right? To how do you break that threshold to really move certain things, and maybe it's asking and asking really tough, challenging questions, and through a podcast like this, right? I do think there's an element of how do we get our folks to still go home safely at the end of the day, each day, and come back in a really good spirit. How do you measure spirit? I have no idea. Right. If we did, I'd be advocating, how do we measure to that? But I think through conversations like this, I think the safety industry has to challenge itself, and even, operational leaders or senior VPs of whatever, or executives, I think they have to be a little bit open-minded as well to challenge where we are at from a safety standpoint. Because at some point, an organization is going to get really good at safety, but they're still going to have a couple of injuries throughout the year. But what's gonna push them over that goal? And is it continuing to do what you're doing, or is it, we got to do something differently here? We have to challenge ourselves as an organization to shift the paradigm to really get to where we want to get to, right? And if that's where you're at at an organization, you have to be willing and open to at least having the discussion around that. And sometimes it takes one person to say one thing, and then the conversation starts, right? Or it's something little that you can impact at your own little business unit, and says, we're going to still do what we're doing all the time. We're not going to say a word about metrics for a month, right? Now, as the manager, right, or the leader at locally, you got to figure out what that is. And you got to track that, because you probably don't have the ability to change the organization and what they want to do, metrics and goal wise. So you can't be cavalier about it. But in many regards, just try it. And then if it's successful, go 2 months, go 3 months, right? And there's a quote I heard a while back, and it says, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. So maybe we've just have all this stuff that we just pile on. It feels okay. It's pretty light. But now I got this habit of reporting metrics the first time, all the time, every time. How do I break that? Well, I don't know. It's so heavy right now. I can't break it. So I often think of that quote when it comes to how do I affect change. You're dealing with a lot of other stuff that you have to you have to change. But something as little as saying, I'm not going to talk about metrics for a month. Maybe that bleeds into, like I said, a quarter, 6 months, a year. And if your outcomes are the same, I'd take a hard look at your culture and see how your culture is doing, because I would suspect that went up.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So that makes sense to me. I don't know. I guess it's just one of these topics that I'm super passionate about. We're in the safety space. And again, I know that you've kind of broadened your horizons a little bit, but so many people talk about this, like getting to zero idea, this idea of we're going to get to this place where we're going to be incident free. And I think that that's so admirable as a goal, but I think there's an obvious question, which is that, as you kind of alluded to, everybody's using these incident statistics as the only indicator of success. And so if you ever got to zero, how would you ever be able to stay there? Because you're taking your kind of only data input and bringing it down to nothing. And I think that's such an interesting conversation to have, is just to know, how do we evolve what it is that we're tracking from a metrics perspective, so that we're focusing more on celebrating what we want to see, rather than just saying, oh man,
right. Here we go again.
That helicopter photo of all the people with our millions of LTI free man hours, and now we're back to zero. And I just think it's such a backwards approach. But
I think I did have a thought on that too, like, because I know we've talked about that in the past as well, and I think how you either stay at zero or stay really close to zero under the confines of what we have with the metrics we're working in and sort of where the industry is at. That paradigm hasn't shifted yet. So, okay, acknowledge that reality. Okay, well, we can move forward with that. I think it's equally important to stress it's how you react in that situation when you do have an incident occur. And whether you're an organization that has 60 incidents occur in a year or 5, the goal is to have nobody get hurt at work and take that safety home with them. So they're thinking about safety in both environments, right? Because you can't flip the switch with safety. But how you react as a leader when something does go wrong perpetuates throughout the organization, where folks are either going to operate in a fearful environment, where my boss or my supervisor or my other folks in the organization don't want to hear it, don't get hurt, so I'm going to hide this injury, right? Or, hey, that's okay. I hope things are going well. I want you to get the care you need. What did you learn from this? Or what can we do different as an organization to not let this happen to you or anybody else again? We really didn't want this to happen. Nobody wanted it to happen. I've seen really good leaders act that way before, and all the stress, all the pressure, it all goes away. And then that person's going to learn from that. But the people around them that have been through that with them are going to learn from that as well. So I really think it's how you respond as a leader in that moment of an situation. Am I going to give that person a hug and say, I'm here for you and help them out? Or am I going to say, that wasn't cool, you just cost me?
Yeah. Are you learning a lesson, or are you reporting a mistake?
Right.
Yeah. Is there any advice you'd have for people who feel like they're in a situation currently where it is a little bit more that blame culture, and they want to turn things around? I mean, you can do what you can on an individual level, but any ways to think about solving that up the chain?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the organization. It's going to depend on the actual, the uniqueness of it. I would say, one, don't give up on it. Reach out to other colleagues, reach out to other folks who don't work in your industry and explain the situation to them, because they have different perspectives than you do. They might not know the nuances of what you're trying to get done within your business or whatever that is that you do, but they've come across challenges before. They not be like for like, but they may say something or think about something that might just click and resonate. So don't, take the blinders off and say there's other folks out there that have come across challenges, and it might just be outside of your industry. So don't give up, but also use a different resource to sort of crack that code. I've used that before. If I try to explain a situation to somebody who doesn't know my industry, and then they start asking really, really simple questions that I don't have answers to, I go, oh, okay, maybe there's a big knowledge gap on my part, or I didn't understand something, or maybe that's where the other individual is coming from, because they might not be as technically sound on the regulation as I might be. So that, to me, I've found success in that regard, is to ask. It's almost like ask a stranger, right? And don't give up on that. So.
Okay, cool. Well, I have one kind of final place where I want to dig around a little bit, and it goes back to this kind of transition that we've spent some time discussing around moving from the safety space into the operations space. And you mentioned earlier that making that switch, you probably came in thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna kill this. I know things,"
Yeah.
and then you said, "Oh man,
Yeah,
I think that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect." Worth a Google if it's a real psychological principle. Anyway, we with that in mind, is there anything that you now being where you are, kind of being settled more into that operational role, what's the thing you wish you would have told health and safety Jeff? What should he have been spending more time on to be a more effective person in that role?
Probably more trying to understand that everybody's risk spectrum is completely different, and they have different competing priorities from the organization. I just didn't have an appreciation for that. So sort of with that said, I didn't have an appreciation for somebody in the operational space who's been doing it for just say 10 years, which is relatively short in the grand scheme of things, but they've come across so many different health and safety scenarios from an operational standpoint that they're willing to tolerate a little bit more risk than maybe a health and safety person is, because quite frankly, health and safety people, we are so risk averse for the right reasons, right? We don't want folks to get hurt. Okay. And that is a very good spot to come from. Then acknowledge reality that safety is hard, and it's not just about the physical stuff that the people do or the policies that you write. There's the mental side of the people and how they're approaching their day-to-day work, and where are they cognitively around everything. So I know for sure I didn't have that appreciation, but also people's their risk tolerance is completely different than health and safety, because they've done it before. They have a safety measure in place that's safe and effective, and it's been effective for numerous years. So you have to seek to understand that at that particular location, and then say, okay, I think I understand this. I have a firm grasp of that thing that you guys are doing. But in many regards, I did not have that appreciation for everybody is on a different spot on that risk spectrum.
Do you think that part of that is also the almost the categories of risk that somebody in an operational role is considering are just broader than a health and safety professional? That you're also thinking about commercial risk and things like that might be invisible to somebody with just a health and safety background?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different things you juggle and you balance. It's your, if you have what's my client going to think about this if I have to go do this particular thing over here, whether it's a capital investment that's safety related, and you have to sort of sell that, and it's important, but then you have to balance, well, if I don't do anything, my team's going to look like I'm not doing anything around safety, and I can't do nothing because I care about these people, right? And so you can be conflicted at these times. But again, I think it's just you chat it through, you talk it through, and you have to really figure out where people are along that risk spectrum to be able to find that win-win solution, hopefully.
And so just to, again, going back to that, you're talking to yourself 2 years ago, and you're saying you got to get a better feel for the fact that people have this broader or different risk spectrum than you. Can you give us an example of how somebody who might find themselves in that position right now, what should they do? Is this about going and taking somebody for a coffee and just saying, hey, can you help me understand what we're not seeing here? Or is there something else that you would advise as far as giving yourself that little bit more empathy for where people are at?
Yeah, I would say sort of have the individual explain to you why you're wrong and be open to that, right? You have to, like, clean slate. I'm stuck, but I know I need to get this done. I think it takes a lot for that to happen, though, as a health and safety person. And looking back, I think I was probably a little bit too rigid on some things, and we just had to get the task done, and the task kept coming. So you just got to keep pushing it and pushing it. But I think there's an element where I would tell myself to say, stop, see the forest through the trees, acknowledge that you may be wrong, and let other people tell you in a professional way, right? Don't get beat up, but in a professional way, tell you why this isn't going to work, or why you're looking at it in a wrong way. I think that takes a lot to be able to do that. But again, if you take that 30 minutes to open yourself up for that, right? Now you're bleeding in the culture stuff. Now you're bleeding into the intent of why we're doing the things we are, and you're building the trust with that individual as well. So you're probably getting a heck of a lot more done than just having an open mind, right? In that regard. So yeah, I would tell myself 2 years ago to just take a deep breath, get other people's perspectives, and let them tell you why you're wrong. And then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I get it now. Or at least I think I get a little bit more than I did when I came into the situation.
Well, I think, I'm just looking here. It's kind of amazing. I feel like we've kind of just gotten started here, but we're already a nice bit over an hour. So I guess we'll wrap things up on that little bit of wisdom there. I guess with that, anything, or is there anything you want to plug or anything you want people to check out that you think is worth them looking at, or anything else you want to put out there?
Yeah, I would say give yourselves a break in many regards. We focus on the right things, and when you can kind of get down in the weeds on whatever the topic is, look up, see the forest through the trees. We're all people. We're all humans. We all have emotions. We all have families. We all have different pressures, whatever that is, right? I think at the end of the day, we have, safety is hard. Safety is really, really hard, because you're not just dealing with a policy or an SOP, or the numbers didn't add up for whatever reason financially, right? People bring emotion, and emotion is a data set that you can use. So I think if you can crack that code a little bit, maybe start to challenge yourself as a leader to understand maybe how people think, or what motivates people, or why do people make certain decisions when they're stressed, or these little things that tie to me. For me, they tie more to the emotional aspect that I'm not sure safety talks a lot about, or puts a lot of. How do I educate folks on this safety element that is tied to emotion, right? Because that to me is where I'm now, being on the operational side, is where I think is time well spent, sort of looking at how do I manage and get the most out of the folks, but also get the most out of the folks in the way that they want it as well, right? So it's a journey. It's tough. It's hard. Give yourself a break every now and again is what I'd say, but also it's a burden that I think we've all signed up for, whether it's in operations or health and safety, and I think that's a good burden to have, because at the end of the day, we do want to have folks be safe, go home to their families, and when they're cutting the grass, we want them to throw their safety goggles on, because they don't want a rock to flick up and hit them in the eye, right? It's that, if that is the one thing that could happen, and somebody does that and they come into work and tell you the next day that, I thought twice about not putting on my safety glasses when I was cutting my grass, and it worked and it paid off. Okay, not your job's not done, because you got to go influence some more other people, but I think that would be a heck of a success for sure.
Okay. Well, I think that's a valuable note to leave things on. I have a bunch of other things I'd like to dig into, but I don't want to muddy the message too much. Awesome. Well, again, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. I think there's a lot of great things here that people can take, something away from, and it was great chatting. I think that this whole kind of I wasn't expecting the conversation to be so focused on emotional intelligence. Certainly something I got a lot to learn about, But anyway, I think it's a novel take, and I think there's a lot of things here that, again, not just safety professionals could benefit from learning more about, but even guys with tech companies like me. So anyway, with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you again, and look forward to having you on again sometime.
Yeah, good stuff, Joe. Appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Safety Leaders Now with Joe Meadows. This show is presented to you by OpsLock and produced by me, Valeria Carnau. Big thanks to Diala for the theme music and Hatch for editing the podcast. Our next episode comes out in a week. If you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to Safety Leaders Now on any platform that you stream podcasts. If you want to connect with Joe, don't hesitate to reach out to him on LinkedIn at Joe Meadows. Thanks for listening. Catch you on the next episode.